August 28, 1862. Groveton, Virginia. Confederate General Richard Ewell sat on his horse watching his division engage Union forces. He was at the height of his powers. For 6 months he had fought under Stonewall Jackson in the Shenandoah Valley. 6 months, 5 major battles, 5 victories. Ewell had never lost. He had defeated Union generals Banks, Frémont, and Shields. He had captured thousands of prisoners. He had helped Jackson tie down 60,000 Union troops with only 15,000 Confederates. He was being called one of the finest division commanders in the Confederate Army. Then, in an instant, everything changed. A musket ball struck him in the left knee. The impact knocked him from his horse. The pain was excruciating. His aides rushed to him. They carried him from the field. Army surgeons examined the wound. The knee was shattered, bone fragments, destroyed cartilage. Infection was already setting in. There was only one option: amputation. Richard Ewell, the general who had never lost a battle, lost his leg instead. He would return to command 9 months later. He would lead a corps at Gettysburg. He would fight at the Wilderness in Spotsylvania. But he would never be the same general again. The man who had been brilliant and decisive became hesitant and uncertain. The general who had won every battle started making mistakes that would haunt him for the rest of his life. This is the story of Richard Ewell, Old Bald Head, the profane, eccentric general who was undefeated in battle, until the day he lost his leg and everything changed. Welcome, friends. I am so glad you are here with me today. The Civil War produced many one-armed and one-legged generals. Medical technology was primitive, amputations were common, but most generals who lost limbs retired from active command, not Richard Ewell. Ewell lost his leg at the Battle of Groveton in August of 1862. 9 months later, he returned to command. He led a corps of 30,000 men. He fought in some of the most important battles of the war. But something had changed. The general who had been brilliant under Stonewall Jackson became indecisive under Robert E. Lee. The commander who had won 5 straight battles in the Valley Campaign made critical mistakes at Gettysburg that may have cost the Confederacy the war. Was it the leg? Was it the trauma? Was it the pressure of higher command? Or was Ewell simply a great division commander who was promoted beyond his abilities? Today, we are going to tell his story. The story of a man who went undefeated in battle until he lost his leg. The story of how one wound can change not just a man's body, but his entire nature as a commander. If you love these complex stories of Civil War generals, stories that show how war changes people in unexpected ways, I hope you will subscribe to our channel. Now, let us go back to the beginning. To a bald, profane, eccentric officer whom nobody thought would become one of the Confederacy's finest generals. Background: Old Bald Head. Richard Stoddert Ewell was born on February 8, 1817 in Georgetown near Washington, D.C. He was the grandson of Benjamin Stoddert, the first Secretary of the Navy. Ewell attended West Point, graduating 13th in his class in 1840. His classmates gave him 2 nicknames that would stick for life: Old Bald Head or simply Baldy, because he was already balding at 23. After graduation, Ewell served with the 1st U.S. Dragoons on the frontier. He fought in the Mexican War, earning promotion to captain for bravery at Contreras and Churubusco. It was at Contreras that he met Captain Robert E. Lee conducting a nighttime reconnaissance. The two would serve together again under very different circumstances. After Mexico, Ewell spent years on the frontier, New Mexico, Arizona, fighting Apache. One skirmish under Cochise left him wounded in 1859. Ewell was a strange man. Historian Larry Tagg, using General Richard Taylor's description, described him as rather short at 5 feet 8 inches. He had just a fringe of brown hair on an otherwise bald, bomb-shaped head. His eyes bulged slightly. He had a habit of cocking his head to one side like a bird. He spoke in a high, piping voice, and he was extraordinarily profane. Where Stonewall Jackson was pious and stern, Ewell cursed like a sailor. He was also a hypochondriac. He complained constantly of mysterious ailments. He had peculiar dietary habits, claiming he could only digest wheat in certain forms. His men found him eccentric, but they also found him brave and effective in combat. When Virginia seceded in 1861, Ewell was torn. He had pro-Union sentiments, but Virginia was his home state. On May 7, 1861, he resigned his U.S. Army commission and joined the Virginia Provisional Army. 2 days later, he was appointed colonel of cavalry. Within weeks, he was a brigadier general. By January 1862, he was a major general, and in the spring of 1862, he was sent to serve under a man who would change his life, Thomas Stonewall Jackson. The Valley Campaign, 5 battles, 5 victories. In May of 1862, Stonewall Jackson was conducting a campaign in the Shenandoah Valley. His mission: tie down Union forces, prevent them from reinforcing McClellan's advance on Richmond. Jackson had about 15,000 men. The Union forces in and around the valley totaled over 60,000. 3 separate Union armies, Banks, Frémont, and Shields. Jackson needed good division commanders. Robert E. Lee sent him Richard Ewell. At first, Ewell was frustrated. Jackson had a habit of keeping his subordinates uninformed about his plans. He would give orders without explanation. He expected immediate obedience without discussion. Ewell, who had served on the frontier where commanders operated more independently, found this maddening. He complained to friends that Jackson was secretive and difficult, but Ewell adapted. And once he understood Jackson's methods, he became one of his finest subordinates. The Valley Campaign lasted from late March to early June of 1862. In that time, Jackson's army, with Ewell commanding a division, fought 5 major battles. First Battle of Winchester, May 25th. Ewell's division attacked Union forces under General Banks. Ewell personally led the assault. His men drove the Union army from the field. Banks retreated all the way to the Potomac. Union casualties over 3,000, Confederate casualties under 400, a crushing victory. Battle of Cross Keys, June 8th. Union General Frémont attacked Jackson's army. Ewell commanded the Confederate defensive position. He held his ground. He repulsed multiple Union attacks. Frémont withdrew. Confederate victory. Battle of Port Republic, June 9th. Jackson and Ewell defeated Union forces under General Shields. The Union army retreated. The Valley Campaign was over. In 6 weeks, Jackson and Ewell had marched over 400 miles. They had fought 5 major battles. They had defeated 3 Union armies, and Ewell had never lost. His performance in the Valley Campaign made him famous. He was being compared to Jackson himself. Confederate newspapers praised Old Bald Head as one of the Army's finest generals. Then came the 7 days' battles around Richmond. Ewell fought at Gaines' Mill. He fought at Malvern Hill. He continued his winning streak. Then came Second Bull Run. Ewell defeated Banks again at Cedar Mountain on August 9th. He fought brilliantly at Bronner's Farm on August 28th. And then, later that day at Groveton, came the musket ball. The Wound, August 28, 1862. The Battle of Groveton was a brutal, close-range firefight. Confederate and Union forces stood less than 100 yards apart and fired into each other until dark. Ewell was in the thick of it as always. He did not believe in commanding from the rear. He rode among his men, directing the fight. A Union soldier fired. The ball struck Ewell in the left knee. The impact was devastating. The kneecap shattered. The joint was destroyed. Ewell fell from his horse, unconscious from the shock. His aides carried him to a field hospital. Confederate surgeons examined the wound. In 1862, a shattered knee meant one thing: amputation. There was no way to save the leg. If they did not amputate, infection would set in, gangrene, death. The surgeons amputated Ewell's left leg below the knee. Ewell woke up from the ether to find his leg gone. The pain was terrible. The psychological shock was worse. He was 35 years old. He had been a cavalry officer all his adult life. And now he had one leg. His military career should have been over, but there was one bright spot in his recovery. A woman came to nurse him. Her name was Lizinka Campbell Brown. She was his first cousin. They had known each other since childhood. She was a widow with children. She had property in Tennessee. As Lizinka tended Ewell during his long, painful recovery, their childhood friendship rekindled into something more. In May of 1863, they married. By then, Ewell had made a decision. He would not retire. He would return to command. He was fitted with a wooden leg. He could not walk well. He needed crutches when not on horseback, but he could ride, and if he could ride, he could command. In May of 1863, after the Battle of Chancellorsville, Stonewall Jackson was killed by friendly fire. Robert E. Lee needed a new commander for the Second Corps. He chose Richard Ewell. Ewell was promoted to lieutenant general. He would command 1/3 of the Army of Northern Virginia, 30,000 men. He would be one of the 3 most important generals in Lee's army, alongside James Longstreet and A.P. Hill. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. The chance to prove he could command at the highest level, and Ewell would spend the rest of his life wondering if he had failed. Gettysburg, the fateful hesitation. On July 1, 1863, Ewell's Second Corps approached Gettysburg from the north. They smashed into the Union 11th Corps, the same corps that had been routed by Jackson at Chancellorsville. Ewell's men drove the Union troops back through the town. The Union forces retreated to Cemetery Hill south of Gettysburg. They were in disarray, exhausted, disorganized. Robert E. Lee arrived on the field. He saw the strategic importance of Cemetery Hill. The Confederates could take that hill, they would dominate the battlefield. The Union Army would have to retreat or be destroyed. Lee sent orders to Ewell, take Cemetery Hill if practicable. Ewell looked at the hill. He saw Union troops digging in. He saw artillery being positioned. He saw reinforcements arriving. His division commanders urged him to attack. General Jubal Early said they could take the hill. General Edward Allegheny Johnson said his division was fresh and ready. Ewell hesitated. He thought about Lee's qualifier, if practicable. Was it practicable? His men were tired. The Union position was strengthening every minute. If he attacked and failed, he would expose his corps to a counterattack. Ewell decided not to attack. The next morning, Union forces had fortified Cemetery Hill. They had established a defensive line along Cemetery Ridge. The position was now impregnable. The Confederates would spend the next 2 days trying to dislodge the Union Army from positions they could have taken on July 1st. After the war, many Confederate generals blamed Ewell for the loss at Gettysburg. They said Stonewall Jackson would have attacked without hesitation. They said Ewell's caution cost the Confederacy the battle and possibly the war. Lee never publicly blamed Ewell, but there were whispers, questions. Would Jackson have hesitated? The decline. After Gettysburg, Ewell continued to command the Second Corps, but something had changed. At the Battle of the Wilderness in May of 1864, Ewell fought well initially. But when Lee gave him discretionary orders to attack, he hesitated again. At Spotsylvania Courthouse, Ewell's indecision frustrated Lee so much that Lee himself rode forward to lead the defense. Accounts describe Ewell as hysterically berating his soldiers without effect. Lee finally made a painful decision. Ewell's lingering injury was affecting his judgment. The stress of Corps command was too much. Lee relieved Ewell from command of the Second Corps and reassigned him to command the garrison of Richmond. It was a demotion disguised as a reassignment. Everyone knew it. Ewell commanded the defenses of Richmond until April of 1865. During the Confederate retreat from Richmond, his ragtag force was surrounded and captured at Sailor's Creek on April 6, just 3 days before Lee's surrender at Appomattox. Ewell spent the last months of the war as a prisoner at Fort Warren in Boston Harbor. He and 16 other Confederate generals signed a letter condemning the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. After his release in July of 1865, Ewell retired to his wife's farm in Tennessee. He lived quietly. He rarely spoke about the war. He died of pneumonia on January 25, 1872. He was 54 years old. Reflection: what happened to Ewell? Friends, what happened to Richard Ewell? How did a general who never lost a battle in the Valley Campaign become the general who failed to take Cemetery Hill? Historians have debated this for over 150 years. There are several theories. The physical theory: the loss of his leg affected his stamina and his judgment. The constant pain, the difficulty moving, the exhaustion of commanding while disabled. Some accounts suggest Ewell suffered from what we would now recognize as chronic pain and possibly PTSD. The command theory: Ewell was a brilliant division commander but not suited for corps command. Under Jackson, he received specific orders and executed them brilliantly. Under Lee, who gave more discretionary orders, he struggled with the responsibility of making strategic decisions. The personality theory: Jackson and Ewell were a perfect match. Jackson's aggressiveness pushed Ewell forward. Lee's gentler style allowed Ewell's natural caution to emerge. Ewell needed a commander who would order him to attack. Lee's, if practicable, gave him an out, and he took it. The wife theory: some historians, perhaps unfairly, suggest that after his marriage, Ewell became more cautious. He had something to lose now, someone waiting for him. His wife Lisinka was known to worry about him. Did that affect his willingness to take risks? Probably. The truth is all of these factors combined. Ewell was wounded physically and psychologically. He was promoted to a level of command that required qualities he did not possess, and he was trying to fill the boots of Stonewall Jackson, which no one could do. But here is what we should remember. Before Groveton, Richard Ewell never lost a battle. His record in the Valley Campaign was flawless. He was one of the Confederacy's finest division commanders. The wound did not just take his leg, it changed who he was as a general. As we close today, I want you to think about that moment at Groveton one more time. August 28, 1862. Richard Ewell, at the height of his powers, undefeated in battle, one of the rising stars of the Confederate Army, then a musket ball, a shattered knee, an amputation, and everything changed. Ewell returned to command. He tried to be the general he had been, but the man who came back from that wound was not the same man who had fought in the valley. The hesitation at Gettysburg, the indecision at the Wilderness, the relief from command, these were not the actions of the general who had defeated Banks and Frémont and Shields. Richard Ewell's story is a reminder that wounds do not just affect the body, they affect the mind, the spirit, the very essence of who a person is. The general who never lost a battle lost something far more important at Groveton. He lost the confidence and aggression that had made him great. He returned to command with one leg. But the part of him that had made him undefeated, that part never came back. Friends, if this story made you think, please share it. Richard Ewell deserves to be remembered not just for Gettysburg, but for the brilliant general he was before his wound. And tell me in the comments, had you heard of Richard Ewell before? What do you think changed him after Groveton? I read every comment and I love learning from you. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time. Keep their memory alive.